Hey everybody, it's Marking Bad, and I've been sitting on this for a little while because I wanted to let it bounce around in my head some, but I decided I would finally get around to slowly working through the various questions posed in Kristi Winters' Reasonable Questions for Anti-SJWs, even though I don't consider myself to be explicitly anti-SJW. And first up, we have that one janitor.
Are you able to understand the irony of responding to the perceived political correctness of the left with exasperated reactionary hypersensitivity of your own?
If you're struggling to understand the satirical and overwrought presentation of flailing offense as a mirror being held up to the actions of the social justice crowd, I'm not sure I'm going to be any help in assisting you to understand the process. But I would suggest following Godfrey Elfwick on Twitter, and maybe that'll help you a little.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general? If so, what? Okay, just step up, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk. If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
I don't deny that systemic racism could exist. I question that it exists as something demonstrable in Western culture. Honestly, I'm from Canada, so I'm going to make a little bit of an appeal to ignorance here. I don't see what people in the US see. What I do see is that systemic racism, yes, has occurred and has been targeting the First Nations people here in the past. Now, difference is in Canada, I don't see First Nations people, First Nations advocates, activists, blocking LGBTQ plus parades with advocacy led by a Muslim woman that tweeted that she's struggling to not kill men and white people. And insofar as I demonize BLM, I do so because they co-opt the necessary discussions of other groups, talk over other minorities, have at least ignored, if not directly engaged in, open rioting, and they diminish the victimization of other groups. For instance, the Mizzou Vigil. There was a BLM activist there, ostensibly to lead the vigil, and she tried to turn it into a pity party focused solely on her. BLM Toronto stopped the Pride Parade in the most multicultural city in Canada. And we've had less than 20 confirmed incidences of police brutality in Canada in the last century. For fuck's sakes, Christine Garcia, the first San Diego transgender police officer, organized an event to honor lost transgender lives, and she was banned from her own event because she's a police officer.
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
Why do you misunderstand that this isn't a syntax issue, but an issue of addressing the underlying causes on all sides that have created a need to discuss police brutality and its impact on certain groups? BLM might once upon a time have had relevant comments to make about that particular issue. But if I go and look at studies on the adult outcomes of early single parenthood, lack of father figures, and lack of education, I discover that children raised in dire socioeconomic conditions in single-parent homes have vastly lower educational attainment and success, diminished economic success, greater likelihood of delinquency, criminal association, and police interaction, greater likelihood of developing substance abuse issues, greater likelihood of premarital or extramarital parenthood of their own, and a greater likelihood of relationship instability in adulthood. Would you like to take a guess, just a guess, at what community is vastly overrepresented in single-parent situations in the U.S. currently? It's blacks, with approximately 52% of black children being raised in single-parent homes, according to the Population Reference Bureau, and PolitiFact confirms Don Lemon's comments about roughly 72% of children born to black women in the U.S. being born out of wedlock. And these things have an impact, and you see similar negative outcomes disproportionately affecting First Nations people in Canada because of significant issues with single parenthood in those families. And no, before you go there, it's really clear and obvious that not all single-parent households produce negative outcomes. Now, part number 2 of this problem is something I'm fairly certain I've heard Justicar discuss, though I might be mistaken, it might have been somebody else. But policing in America has changed significantly over time. Where community policing used to be a common sight, the local flatfoot on the beat that everybody knew, and he was respected, if not well-liked, well, that's a thing of the past, and there's essentially no educational requirements for becoming a police officer. I'm almost 40, and all I have to do to become a police officer is pass the physical exam. That's it. So, you have police that are better armed, with less training on how to de-escalate a situation, less direct interaction with their community, in communities that they didn't grow up in, and you have communities that don't know or trust the officers assigned to them. You have youth growing up with negative outcomes and in piss-poor economic conditions in environments where their peer group approval revolves mostly around negative attitudes towards authority, and guess what you get? You get a fucking tinderbox. This is a way more complex issue than blacks have disproportionately more interactions with police, and claiming that is the only impact on the matter, or that only one side of this issue needs to be examined, is really fucking facile.
Are you willing to publicly acknowledge and admonish the massive amount of hatred, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that a lot of your fans infringe upon people? And I don't mean these tiny disclaimers that you put under the description fold or flash for 2 seconds at the beginning of the video that you know nobody reads. I mean a public and ongoing anti-bullying stance. Or do you kind of like watching your fans go around harassing people and calling them slurs and telling them to kill themselves? You kind of like it, don't you? I mean, if that's your thing, and I guess that's just what you're into, just makes you a dick.
If you have any specific instances of any member of my fan base, whether it be on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, engaging in bullying or harassment, actual actions that resemble bullying or harassment in form, function, or in intent, feel free to forward them to me, and I will address the individuals responsible as necessary. Now, that appears to be more than can be said of, say, fans of Lily Allen recently, or can be said concerning the events surrounding Kristi Winters' apparent infatuation with Bering and his subsequent doxing. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a jerk on the internet. Do you have comments, concerns, questions, or irrational hatred? Feel free to comment below. Find me on Facebook and Twitter, or don't. I'm here for my validation and not for yours.